Welcome to A Place for Film, the IU Cinema podcast. On this week's episode, we're talking about Slapsticon. All right, hello everyone. Welcome to the show. My name is Andy Hunsucker, and Jason is not here this week. Strange conglomeration of events and illnesses has sort of left me on my own this week, but we had a huge event at the cinema this week and needed to talk about it. So with me this week to discuss Slapsticon is Andy Uhrich from the IU Film Archives. Welcome.
Hello, Andy. Thanks for having me back.
It's the Andy show today.
Yes.
So Jason will be back next week. And Slapsticon was at the IU Cinema this past weekend. I spent a lot of time there. Andy, you were there even more than I was, I think.
I was there for almost every screening except for maybe one out of the million.
Yeah. It went from noon on Thursday to about 6 o'clock on Sunday, and they literally scheduled till midnight pretty much every night.
Yeah.
So I missed Saturday afternoon and evening, but otherwise I was basically there. Okay. So we're going to go ahead and talk about Slapsticon, which huge event that happened at the cinema this weekend. People flying in from all over the world to come see this. This is a silent comedy film festival, and this has been around for about a decade, and I think they were off last year because they had lost their venue, but they're back this year with the IU Cinema. And literally they schedule all these short films and some feature films, live accompaniment at anything silent. Just an amazing event, and I had a great time. Andy?
It was really fantastic. It was a great opportunity to see a lot of films that would normally never play or normally would never come out on DVD.
Yep.
It went way beyond the sort of obvious Chaplin, Keaton sort of trio, with Harold Lloyd. It went way beyond that. And it was really a one-of-a-kind opportunity to see a lot of these films that are super rare. Yes.
I did see Buster Keaton once in like his very last film, which we'll talk about that later. I saw Charlie Chaplin once as well in a film where he was playing a bit part as a policeman, which that kind of blew my mind. And then I did see one Harold Lloyd film, which there was another Harold Lloyd that I missed, but I did see the one Harold Lloyd film. But let's just kind of look through some of this stuff. We'll kind of talk about experiences as we go through here, but Thursday, June 27th at 1 o'clock, Laurel and Hardy's Laughing 20s. So this was like a documentary about about Laurel and Hardy, both how they sort of got together and how their personas developed and how they interacted with other comedians in that era. Either through films or just other films that came out from that studio. This was also really interesting. This whole thing was a really interesting history lesson because I always hear about Chaplin and Keaton and all that stuff. I never heard about the studios. I knew the name Max Sennett just because that was a very famous name in that era. I didn't really know the name Hal Roach that much. So I learned a lot. And there's a dozen of these sort of small comedians that I had never heard of in my life. And now I realize they were really good. They did a lot of good stuff. And then at 3 o'clock, the Weiss-Aroni, the Weiss brothers was, again, a little history lesson. These some guys who did really low-budget comedies, and they were they sort of had a thing where they would sort of grab comedians who had been retired,
their
maybe
career was
forcibly,
almost over. Yeah.
from the big studios. So you have like these sort of bigger names in some of these films. Were there any of these that you thought were really good?
I'm trying to think back. There was like a 90 films since then.
I know.
I thought that was a really great. Like you said, a great history lesson. Mm-hmm. It's a smaller studio, which had normally not been talked about, but all really fantastic.
Yeah. I really liked Sock and Run. I had never heard of Snub Pollard before. He's this guy. He's got this big handlebar mustache, and I saw him like several other times in films where he was not the lead actor, and he always has that mustache. I wonder if he shaved that off, or I'm assuming it's a makeup sort of thing. If he took that off, if he's just totally anonymous at that point. But what's interesting about Sock and Run, and oh man, this book is amazing. This is literally like your guidebook to all these films. And even if this is the only piece, even if you were just handed this book and didn't get to see any of the films, you still get a lot out of this. Like just this book itself is pretty amazing.
Yeah, I think it's indicative of the attitude in general of Slapsticon and other sort of related sort of film collector, archivist film festivals where it's got a sort of completist mentality, which I think has got a really great thing is they try to discover everything that Stub Pollard was ever in, and that leads to sort of finding these sort of unappreciated, maybe later works. Sometimes they're sort of unsung gems. Other times they're things that maybe should be forgotten. But but in the interest of learning about the entire work of a performer or of a studio, this is really a great chance, both in the sort of written form and on the screen. Yeah.
And I guess we should say they used the line several times, rarities, not hilarities. Some of this stuff you'll never see this anywhere else, but it wasn't particularly funny. There's this one here, Sour Milk, which the print was in pretty bad shape. It was really kind of hard to sort of see what was going on, but it was pretty interesting as you went through it. And then, and a lot of this was just kind of interesting, but not necessarily really funny. Speaking of the Marx Brothers stuff, they did some Marx Brothers stuff, but not the standard Marx Brothers stuff. So the Marx Brothers rarities were actually really interesting because they started out showing the trailers for a lot of their different films, which were hilarious. And they shot extra stuff for the trailers. So there's trailers for stuff that I'd never even heard of before. I'm familiar with Duck Soup, Night at the Opera, Night in Casablanca, those sorts of things. But they threw in some other stuff that I can't even remember the name of it anymore because it was, I think, Day at the Races was one of them, and a couple of others. They also showed they had this unfinished pilot that they did that they were supposed to be involved in, and this was well after their sort of film career was over. And it was funny because they showed literally all of it. Like it even had the slates and stuff on it where it was like, let's sync the sound here. Then it would show like the wide shot and then the close-ups on each angle, and like Chico would have his line, and then it would pan over to Harpo, and then Harpo would just stand there and make a face. But it really was interesting stuff because you sort of saw how these characters didn't change. They didn't change. They didn't grow. They managed to play the same characters for 40, 50 years, and people still loved it. And it really worked. And I don't know if there will ever be another comedian or any actor who can manage to do that for that amount of time and have people still care about what they're doing.
Why mess with perfection?
Exactly.
And
exactly.
I think that sort of unfinished TV pilot is once again the sort of completist sort of idea. Like let's watch watch everything we can with the Marx Brothers, even if it's not a finished work.
Yeah.
So I think in some ways that requires a different, when you're in an audience for Slapsticon, it's very different than sort of a different sort of film festival where everything is pitched to what would the audience like. Here it's like, we're going to show you everything they did regardless. The one thing that I remembered from the Weiss brothers, so sorry to move back a little bit, this film Nize People, spelled Nize, from 1927. It was part of this Izzy and Lizzie series. It was about a Irish family and a Jewish family, and the daughter and the son are a couple, and it's sort of this broad ethnic humor that got a little cartoony at times in terms of how slapstick it got, almost like but it was an interesting take on ethnic issues of the time, very different from maybe some of the other sort of big name slapstick humor that we saw. So issues of sort of ethnic history of the time does come through these films.
Well, and that's something, a lot of studios that sort of still have this stuff, sort of sanitize this a lot. For instance, Warner Brothers, a lot of their Looney Tunes cartoons had some pretty racist stuff by today's standards, but back then nobody really thought twice about it. When they come out with the Looney Tunes collection, that stuff isn't really there. It's kind of, they still have it maybe, but it's locked away. They have a nice disclaimer up front that's like, there will be some offensive stuff, and there was some really offensive stuff. There's at least 2 examples I can think of that are way beyond anything that I've ever seen as far as like racism goes. But they're not afraid to show that stuff because it's part of the history. It's almost like it's almost in the spirit of like a home movie day, where it's like, we don't care what it was. We want to see what it looked like at that time. We want to be experiencing what people were experiencing at that time. So it works not only as entertainment, but also as like sort of a historical artifact of, not just how people made movies, but what was appropriate, what was acceptable then, and what audiences were interested in.
And then it actually allows for a discussion of what people actually were saying and what they really were talking about, what they really felt about issues of race and ethnicity.
Yeah.
When that stuff's edited out, and I understand why they do that for DVD releases, it makes perfect sense, but it doesn't allow for those conversations to happen.
Yeah.
So it'd be odd to say in this sort of 4 days of comedy and slapstick, we're going to actually begin to have a conversation of what racial identity was really like back then.
Yeah.
But I think that's one of the great things about these sort of maybe forgotten films or sort of underappreciated genres, that it allows for sometimes a more honest or open discussion.
Yeah.
Than big budget films sometimes do.
Sure. The other thing they showed in the Marx Brothers stuff that I loved was, this Harpo and Chico were in this sort of one-off show as part of like one of those anthology shows like GE Theater Presents or something, where they would just do a different, sort of short film almost every week, but package it as a television show. It was Harpo and Chico as a pair of jewel thieves, and it showed their whole process. It was almost totally silent. Neither Harpo nor Chico had a single line at all in the whole thing. And I don't think there was even a spoken word until the very, very end. And I'd always read that Harpo and Groucho were essentially identical, except for Groucho had the mustache. And if you put the mustache on Harpo, they would look exactly – mustache and glasses on Harpo, they would look exactly the same. And they had this great joke where Harpo is the thief going in to steal the jewels, and he puts on the Groucho glasses and mustache like a dime store costume.
Right.
He looks exactly like Groucho. Exactly like Groucho. It was kind of amazing. And then at the very, very end, Groucho shows up for exactly one line. They get caught and they're in a lineup, and Groucho, because Harpo had been wearing the Groucho glasses, he's not identified as the guy who was there. And then Groucho walks in, and the guy's like, "That's him. That's the guy." And then Groucho has a great line, which is something like, "We don't say anything until we talk to our lawyer." And then Harpo does the leg gag where he sort of makes someone else hold his leg, which I don't know why it's funny, but it makes me laugh every single time. It was just great. I mean, that's the sort of thing. It's like, that they did that. Like, that was something they had wanted to do and had this opportunity to put it together. And there was a couple other little things in there, like Harpo in a Pepsi commercial and Chico on a talk show in Britain playing the piano. Just a lot of little things there that were a lot of fun.
Yeah, sorry, I missed it.
Yeah. And I missed the stuff late on Thursday, so we can't really talk about the Jigs and Maggie stuff, although that sounded interesting. So let's move to Friday morning here. The early comedies, which was the source of in fact, most of the most Thursday morning was all of the really, really horrible racist stuff. Actually, no, it was Thursday afternoon was the most racist thing, but there's a couple things interesting in here. They always do a film, this Ham and Bud series, which two guys who sort of had a little bit of success apart, but they were a comedy team called Ham and Bud, Lloyd Hamilton and Bud Duncan. And basically this was a time before political correctness. Apparently, they always have really horrible sort of things to do here. This time they are going around and in some kind of Native American territory, and they are the most horrible thing they do, I think, is they find a young Indian boy and they decide that they need to practice beating up Indians, so they beat up a little kid, which is pretty horrible. Not the most horrible thing I saw, mind you, but that was pretty horrible.
He kind of gets his revenge.
Yes. And that's why I think, in general, I'm not as concerned about Ham and Bud here, because they're clearly the idiots. They're clearly the stupidest people on screen. They might get the better of some smarter people once in a while, but in the end, they pretty much are the ones who are getting punished.
But there was a number of other Lloyd Hamilton who was Ham. There was a number of his shorts throughout the weekend,
yeah.
and I he was one of the people who I'd heard of but never really seen enough to have an opinion of, and some of the other shorts were really fantastic.
Yeah, one in particular I'll mention, and they had DVDs for sale as well down in the lobby, and I actually picked up a couple. One of them I picked up was a bunch of his his solo stuff, so I'm interested to get a look at that stuff. On the totally opposite end of the spectrum, they had the Mr. and Mrs. Sidney Drew shorts. They had several of these throughout the weekend, and they're sort of like almost like comedy of manners sort of things, and they played these back to back, so it was a really weird thing. They would play a married couple, and they just sort of have married couple arguments, and I can't even remember which one this was. They had two of them.
This is the one where Mrs. Drew has an anniversary for everything, so not just their first date and their marriage, but like the first time she baked biscuits.
Yes.
And he was not able to figure out when her anniversary was. And the other one that we watched too had a similar kind of setup where she's in the domestic sphere, he's in the business sphere.
Yes.
He's about regulation and modernity and figuring things out and having a system, and it never works for him.
Yes.
So there's a little bit of comeuppance on him to a degree. But those were charming films. They were really fantastic.
Yeah, those were really nice films. I liked those a lot. The Local Showers with Musty Suffer is the name of the character. Bizarre films. Almost like the comedy version of Saw or something. I mean, they're just so bizarre. This one in particular is about him going to the dentist, and the dentist is like the biggest villain there is, and he's like put through the ringer literally, and all these horrible things happen to him, and he like escapes from the dentist, and it's really it really portrays the dentist as like the most horrifying thing that you could do, which I think, I mean, that attitude still lingers in the country now, even though I don't think going to the dentist is that bad. But that's definitely something that an audience would be able to relate to that. That's something that tells you something about the world at that time.
And I thought that was an interesting film in terms of from a filmmaking standpoint, because it's from 1916, but a lot of the sort of camera shots and the sets seemed like a film almost like 8 to 10 years earlier. Even the setup of the sort of wacky machines that he goes through, it seems like something that was almost from 10 years earlier, whereas other films from around the same time period and the same screening seemed totally modern.
Well, this was from the same, essentially a year later than Ham and Bud, Ham Among the Redskins. Yeah. These are basically, all of these in this section were from before 1920.
Yeah.
And you're right. That film feels very different just cinematically than the rest of them. I really liked The Child Needs a Mother. This had a comedian named Frank Fatty Voss, which literally every overweight comedian was nicknamed Fatty, except for Hardy.
Yeah.
Oliver Hardy. That's the only one that was not nicknamed Fatty. This is a grown-up overweight comedian dressed as like in a dress with pigtails, and he's the daughter. And generally, what happens in the film is the father says you have to do something, and then the daughter beats him up and runs away. Like that happens at least 8 times during the film.
Comedy gold.
I know that one was fascinating.
That's really one that works visually, and I don't think that, that's comedy at its best. I think in a way, it's a visual medium. You have to, at least it is on film, obviously, and you have to sort of watch it for it to make sense.
Yes,
and it was fantastic.
Yes, I don't remember anything about Risks and Roughnecks. Maybe it's just forgettable, or maybe some of these they might not have run for various reasons, but I don't remember that
Prince
one.
didn't show up, or
Yeah. Yeah. I did like Faint Heart and Fair Lady quite a bit. That one was about a sort of a blacksmith, and he's working, and he's sort of thinking about, oh, wouldn't it be nice to like meet a girl from the city? And then literally a bus full of city girls runs into his shack where he's working, and then he meets one, they fall in love, and it has a lot of nice little moments between them, and sort of ends dramatically like most of these do. I think at least 75% of these ended with either a brawl or a chase, and most of the time both. I saw a lot of similar things in these comedies, and it's sort of clear that there wasn't a lot of risk taking in these films. I mean, that's another thing that's interesting about these is that rather than being in, it's the Chaplin stuff, the Buster Keaton stuff that survived and was very interesting, and the Laurel and Hardy stuff, they were either originators or they did something very different from what everyone else was doing. These were more like, we've got to turn something out. It's got to be ready for this week. What worked last time? Let's either do a slight variation on it, or what did that guy do last month that we can do that's kind of similar that we know people already like.
I mean, in some ways, since they're making more than one of these a week, each company was think of it as sort of like the NCIS shows or those kind of like they're making one of those for every week. It's got the same sort of plot structure. The guy takes his glasses off.
Yeah.
I forget. So yes, there's a lot of tropes that these followed, which is one of the fascinating things about being able to watch all these movies at once is you're able to sort of realize that and have a good sense of the genre and the time. Yeah,
I saw one particular bit a couple of times where a character would, for whatever reason, either it was set up that way or they were messing with the lines. There was a water line and a gas line, and they accidentally switched them. So they would try to throw a match away in the sink after turning on the water, and then fire would be shooting out of their sink. I saw that several times throughout the weekend. But yeah. Yeah. And I didn't see any of the Kids and Animals stuff. I had to go home for a little bit during that time. But I was told there was a lot of really good stuff in there.
Yes, it was a lot of great stuff, particularly the Mickey's Tent Show, which was with Mickey Rooney, 1933. So he's 8 years old at the time. And, the joke with Mickey Rooney and Judy Garland is they're always like, let's put on a show and save, he says that. So this is like at the beginning of his career, and he's like, hey, kids, let's put on a show. But he and three other young boys do Mae West routines. So they're all dressed up like Mae West doing the, hey, big boy, come up and see me.
Yeah.
Saying these sort of double entendres like Mae West, but they're like 8, 6, and 5.
Yeah.
So just really wrong.
Yeah.
But hilarious.
Yeah. Yeah. Also, some Our Gang stuff in there. I saw a lot of Our Gang stuff. Not the Little Rascals.
Big difference.
Big difference. This is Our Gang, which was in earlier. Little Rascals was like in the sound era.
Yeah.
And then Our Gang was
mostly in the silent.
Mostly silent era. And then we get to the Hal Roach comedies at 2:00, and Follow the Crowd, which had literally the most racist thing I've ever seen in my life. I don't think I can describe it on the air. It just makes me uncomfortable to even really think about it. And that one really struck me differently because while Ham and Bud were sort of treated like they're kind of dumb, so don't take anything they do seriously, this involved Harold Lloyd treating someone else in a racist manner, essentially a subhuman manner. Harold Lloyd's the hero. Harold Lloyd is the person we're supposed to be holding up as this is the person we want to be like in this film. And he just does something so repulsive. The other thing that bothered me about that is it was clear they really wanted to make that a good bit. Like they worked hard on that. Like they had a meeting to say, let's all get together and figure out the funny thing we can do with this guy who is in blackface, a white guy in blackface. That's bad enough. And then something else really offensive, which I'm not going to describe it on air. I'm just not going to. Other than that, the film was kind of okay. Just that one part that was like the audience groaned very loudly at that moment. So that was pretty rough.
But one of the couple films that dealt with secret societies and which is sort of an odd trope to continue multiple times. I imagine it was sort of the fear of anarchy and communism at the time, but it sort of played as almost like a sort of like horror cult.
Yeah. Well, this was right around the time of the Bolshevik Revolution, and sort of the winding down of World War I. So, I just from watching films like Dr. Zhivago, I kind of get the sense that as Americans were getting news about this stuff, they were sort of in fear of something like that happening here. And so that's really rough. I'm not surprised that there's stuff in that reflected in the films. One of my favorite shorts of the whole weekend, though, was this one called Our Parents' Pickles. That one was so great. I laughed more at this one than I think I had ever laughed at. This was about a guy who is I think this is the right one. Was this? Am I thinking of the right one? I think this is the one where the guy was trying to sell fire extinguishers.
Yes.
Okay, good. I'm on the right track here. Basically, this guy is trying to sell fire extinguishers, and he has to get into this guy's office. And this guy has hired 5 different secretaries in order to keep people out. So he has to find a way to get past all of these people. And every single time what he does is he goes into their office and then he says – he figures out that they're a member of a club like the Shriners or something like that, or the Freemasons or something.
Or they're Irish, and they have like an Irish pin.
Yeah, and he has like a pin that proves it, and then they do the salute for that group together. So funny. So funny. And then it goes into this thing where he's going to he gets into one of these secret societies to get the last sale because the guy at the end is like, oh, and that's another great line that the guy is like, he's like, do you want a fire extinguisher? And he's like, no, I like fires. It's like, what does that even mean? But it was so, so funny. And then he sort of gets into the secret society to gain the trust of the last guy to make the sale. And they're like, you have to burn down a house in order to make it to get into our society. And they're like, who should I burn down? It's like, burn down the guy's house you're trying to sell the fire extinguishers to. He likes fires. And it just goes on and on. It's so funny. The funniest thing I saw probably all weekend long. But I love that one. Our Parents' Pickles.
Hal Roach.
Hal Roach, yes. This is all a section of Hal Roach films. And I'm trying to remember a couple of these other ones. The problem is, like, Our Parents' Pickles, that title has nothing to do with the film. Not a single thing.
There's a parent in it.
There is a parent. But the next one listed here is one called Somewhere in Somewhere. It's like they did not title these in such a way that it made a lot of sense.
Well, they would, these films would have been in and out of movie theaters. They would have played with a bunch of shorts or in front of features. You would have just gone to the movie. It wouldn't have mattered what, you wouldn't have gone to say, hey, let's go check out Never Too Old.
Yeah.
There's Girl Shock, which was a Charlie Chase talkie.
I loved that one. I loved that one because it had a great example of something that I think is coming back in comedy, sort of the comedy freak out, where a guy sort of like loses it in a funny way. So this is about Charlie Chase as the actor here, another person who I'd never heard of, but we saw him in like 5 or 6 of these shorts.
He was
all over the place, and he was something happened to him, something traumatic happened to him during the war, and women terrify him. Like, he can barely talk to a woman. If a woman touches him, he loses it. And this is where that came in. For instance, That's a sort of comedy freak out. Literally, like, and they found several ways to kind of do it where, like, he would see a woman, the woman would sort of touch him on the shoulder or shake hands, and he would, like, freak out and, like, shove somebody into a pool and then run away, and that was really funny. But then they kept finding ways, like, he would see someone over a hedge, and they would stick their hand through the hedge, and he would shake it, and then they would move away and it'd stand up, and it was actually a woman's hand he was shaking, and then he would freak out. And they found a lot of really good ways to kind of make that work.
And it was a fear based on being captured by an all-woman Russian brigade.
Yes.
So this sort of like post-war trauma combined with this fear of sexuality in women, and then the idea that he would be shocked out of it through some sort of crazy psychiatry. It was just a strange, combination.
There was a whole bit where he was trying to get attacked by a dog or something, and that was really funny. But yeah. And then they had a setup of Rob Stone rarities. Rob Stone is a guy that works at the Library of Congress, and there's only one of these I really remember, and I think it's just because the print was a little screwy, where I can't remember the actual name of the film, but it was basically about, like, a pair of brothers who were a comedy team of some kind were expecting a visitor from, like, a cousin to visit them who had just inherited money, and they were going to live off of him. A criminal intercepts the cousin, and then the criminal shows up. They've never met this guy, so they assume it's the right guy. They live across the hall from the police commissioner's daughter, who's having a party, and they're all trying to catch this guy, and everyone decides to dress up as the guy because it's a costume party. It's a whole thing. Unfortunately, there were 2 reels. The second reel was all mixed up. So we saw the end, and then we saw a little bit before the end, and then we saw the very beginning, and then we saw a little bit after that. It's like nothing was in order in that second reel, unfortunately. So it's a little hard to follow, but I think it was pretty good.
It seemed good, and that was I think this is maybe a time to give a shout out to the piano accompanist, Dr. Philip Carley and Dr. Andrew Simpson.
Simpson, yes.
Dr. Carley was able to just play over a film out of order and make it work.
Exactly.
So they were playing, not having seen these movies before. Maybe they'd seen 1 or 2.
Yeah.
But they were just able to play fantastic music, sight unseen. There's a couple of films in that. So Rob Stone is the curator of film collections at the Library of Congress. He had a couple films by this production company called the Vim Comedy Company, which were related to the American arm of the Méliès Company. Though in its later years, I think they were bought out by Lubin, another production company, soon after we saw the movies. But there's one called Deviled Crabs from 1916. Yes. It was shot in Providence, Rhode Island. Once again, seems sort of like an earlier film. This man falls asleep at the fireplace, has this dream, almost like a Faustian dream, where the devil comes and offers him all these riches. Totally bizarre, like trick film, almost like, not the style of film that was made anymore.
Yeah, it was like there was a couple good effects where, like, the camera tilted and the guy sort of was, like, being affected by the camera tilt, like he was stumbling over to the side. A lot of really neat camera tricks in there. Not something you normally see in a film, films from that era where usually the camera was dead still. You could not move the camera. And then evening on Friday was definitely a standout from Lloyd Hamilton, Dynamite. That was one that I really liked a lot. Basically, Lloyd Hamilton, this was 4 years after 5 years after that other Ham and Bud thing, but he looks about 10 years younger because he's not wearing this makeup and mustache combination. He looks almost like a teenager in this film. I don't know if that was his style, that he kind of had a baby face, and that's just kind of how it worked. But this is basically about, there's an evil guy trying to take over a dynamite factory, and Lloyd Hamilton is brought in to be the new foreman and do it. And this one, of course, ends with a chase and a brawl, which was interesting. Apparently,
there was a lot of dynamite everywhere in 1915 to 1925. Like, so many movies are just go into the dynamite room.
Yes. Exactly. That one was really good. I liked that one a lot. My favorite film of the whole weekend, Attaboy. I loved Attaboy. This was a film with Monty Banks, who I had never heard of before, but apparently he was a pretty big name in the day. And I don't know, I couldn't tell if he was stealing for Buster Keaton or if he just sort of was working along the same lines as Buster Keaton. it was a little. There was a great sequence at the end where it felt very much like a Buster Keaton sequence, except they used some models to replace actual stunt work, which the stunts they were doing, I kind of understand why, to get the shots they wanted to get. Although I think Buster Keaton, if he had done that stunt, he would have actually done it.
Yeah.
But just the film itself it's about a guy who's he works at a newspaper. He's not quite a reporter yet.
Copy
editor or something.
Yeah.
He really wants to be a reporter. And he's trying to marry this girl. There's another guy at the paper who doesn't like him, who sort of tricks him into thinking he's been promoted, and also sends him. This guy's written a story about this kidnapping case, and the guy, it's this very rich guy who's being written about, and he's angry and calls and says, "Come over here, and I'll yell at you, and I'll beat you up," and that sort of thing. So he sends the Monty Banks character off to here, thinking he's a reporter going to interview him. Gives him a trick camera that sprays ink on people, and then there's this whole section which was brilliant. And another thing that we never experienced now. This was in the middle of Prohibition. It was a whole sequence about hiding the hooch. This one guy had a bottle, and he was afraid of getting caught with it, so he slips it into the Monty Banks character's pocket. The Monty Banks character sees there's cops looking around. He realizes all of a sudden he has this, and then it's like a 20-minute sequence of the film that is just about this one little thing. And he's walking around a hotel lobby trying to get rid of it. He's trying to pour it out. That doesn't work. He tries to hide it. That doesn't work. He wraps it in a thing, and that makes it sort of look like a baby bottle, and that turns into a whole other thing that's really funny. And then it sort of starts to get into the whole kidnapping plot. Like, that's actually the thrust of the film, where there's some intrigue about that, and he's actually the one. He actually figures out who was the kidnapper before that, and I thought it was great. If this film had survived in a usable form, I think it would be remembered as one of the great silent films. Because again, it would be remembered as sort of a great silent comedy. There's only so many of these that we actually have access to, but I think this is one that it has a lot of great stuff in it.
It was a really strong feature, and it was definitely one of the films that I would recommend to people who didn't want to sit through 40 hours of silent comedies.
Yes.
Like if you had seen the Chaplin and the Keatons, and people wanted to see another feature, I think this would really be pleasurable.
Yeah, and I think this is one that was just restored, maybe, or is it in the process of being restored? I can't remember.
Yeah, it was a pretty nice new print, I think.
Yeah. So assuming this one comes out on DVD, I would definitely like to get a copy of this one. At 10 o'clock was the Buster Keaton film, War Italian Style. And I guess technically it's not a Buster Keaton film. It's a film with Buster Keaton. It had these two Italian comedians named Franco and Ciccio. This comedy team, Franco and Ciccio. I didn't find them funny at all. In fact, I think there's a line here somewhere like in the description where it talks about Franco and Ciccio and says something like Jerry Lewis was too subtle for the Italians. And I get it. So Franco was sort of this. I think it was Franco was the straight. No, I think it's the other way around. Franco was sort of the goofy one, and Ciccio was the straight man. But basically, they play American Marines, and they're bumbling and they screw everything up, and they end up being volunteered for a mission because they look Italian, they can speak Italian, and they have to go behind enemy lines and sort of scout out this Italian place and find out where this huge gun is that's going to destroy the fleet if it comes in from the ocean. There's a lot of ridiculous moments in this film, but I think the most ridiculous moment is when the sort of American general says to these two guys, "You have to change your hair because you've got crew cuts, and that's not that's not an Italian thing." And they literally pull off their wigs on camera and are like, "Look, we've got Italian hairstyles now." It's like, wow.
And that might have been the high point of the movie.
Yeah. Buster Keaton plays a German general. The other thing, I don't know how much of the history is accurate, because it sort of acts like the Italians were these people oppressed by the Germans. I don't know how much of that is accurate, or if there was a certain point in the war where they were sort of an oppressed people. But I seem to remember from my history books the Italians were allies of the Germans, so I don't know where that lies. If they're just sort of playing with it to sort of make the Italians seem like the heroes or something, I don't know. But anyways, that's not the important part. Buster Keaton does have a few good moments in this film, but I would have enjoyed it more if it was literally they just cut up his parts. It would have been about 20 minutes, and we could have gotten home a little earlier that night. The rest of the film was not very good.
But worth it if you want to see every Buster Keaton movie.
Yeah.
You got to see it.
Yeah, exactly. So if if that one ever shows up on Netflix or something, and it wasn't American International, so
yeah, they distributed it.
Yeah, so it's not unreasonable to think that it might end up on Netflix someday. Just fast forward through the parts. If you don't see Buster Keaton, just fast forward. Okay, Saturday morning. They did do some Saturday morning cartoons. Dave Snyder's Memorial Cartoon Show. Dave Snyder was their master projectionist for many years, and he died last year. So he did not get to see this Slapsticon here. But this was his event because he was a collector of these cartoon films. And a couple of these were really good. In fact, I think Bottles is one of the best animated films I've ever seen in my whole life. It's basically, this evil, not evil, but sort of alchemist of some type is sitting at his desk and he's mixing potions, and then he falls asleep. The bottles come to life, and they're all anthropomorphized, and then it goes into a whole thing where he's shrunk down and he has to live among the bottles, and all the bottles have little bits, like there's I can't even remember what all the different bottles were doing, but all of them had like little cultural bits associated with them, and stuff like that. Really good stuff. I loved Bottles.
And that was a Technicolor print and looked really beautiful.
Oh, yeah.
So the sort of hand-colored, hand-painted Technicolor prints looked amazing. I mean, not the prints was hand-colored, but the drawings were.
Yes. There's only one Disney film and one Warner Brothers Looney Tunes film here, so it was interesting to see some of the other stuff coming out. There was Hollywood Picnic, which was from Columbia. This one also had a pretty blatant, bald-faced racist caricature in there, but again, a very kind of thoughtless racist sort of thing, where it was literally just, what is the most common racist thing we could say about this particular race? It wasn't, there was no thought put behind it. And that's very offensive, just the fact that it's just like, we don't need to put any thought into the portrayal of this particular race. But that was sort of like Warner Brothers used to do, the Looney Tunes ones always used to sort of parody different Hollywood stars, and you would see the Three Stooges show up in a film, in a Looney Tunes film, or Clark Gable, or 1,000 other people. This was sort of, I guess, Columbia's take on that. It wasn't very good otherwise, other than just sort of seeing, and I didn't recognize half the people in there anyways.
But fascinating that would be a common cartoon.
Exactly.
Like, let's make a cartoon showing Hollywood stars.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously it would have played before a feature, so you would have maybe seen a movie with some of these people in them in real life, but yeah.
Yeah. Let's see here. And then the Senate spot that next morning. A couple of good ones in here. This was all Max Sennett stuff, and some of it was stuff that he did as part of his when he worked for other studios, when he worked for Keystone Pictures, and some of it he just did by himself when he was sort of separate. The one I liked most, I think, was A Janitor's Wife's Temptation. That was sort of the most fully realized thing. Although, was One by a Foul the one with... No, that was the Fighting Orioles. That was the next day.
Yeah.
That's not what I liked. I liked Fighting Orioles a lot. I don't remember this one. But A Janitor's Wife's Temptation is pretty good. Again, chase and a brawl in that one.
But was that the one with the wife who's sort of put upon and gets sort of tempted by the sort of slick artist upstairs?
Yes.
And she steals the money, and the family gets torn apart, and then at the end, of course, everything's okay.
Exactly.
After people, falling off rooftops and all that kind of stuff.
Yes, this was another interesting thing about this whole. This was when I started to notice another trope in this: the guns.
Yeah.
Literally, the only place you can hit a human being with a gun is their butt. That's the only place a human is vulnerable. Apparently, if you fire a gun at somebody, you will either fire directly into the ground or their butt. That's literally the only two places a bullet can hit. And I love the way I thought it was so funny the way they shoot guns. They all like throwing the gun at somebody. Like this is how they shoot guns. Every single person did it that way. It was so funny to see that.
I mean, I guess you have to emphasize it. There's not going to be the sound of the gun going off. So you want to visualize the...
Exactly. This one, Keystone Girls Open Trout Season, was a really sort of fascinating look at this era when you could sort of just have... Apparently these girls used to like be they used to like open films and be like, I guess... the Barker's Beauties of Keystone, and then they were just like in their own little film. And there was a couple of them they showed. There was this one where they literally go fishing, and whoever catches the first fish gets a medal. And then another one where one of them has had a baby, because I guess this was something that was very important to the audience at that time. Like, where's that one girl? Oh, she went off to have a family, and she comes back to visit, and then the baby is, I can't remember what they put the baby in. It's
like a cart dragged by a dog.
Yes,
and
that's
then
right.
The dog runs off because dogs will be dogs and chase things. And,
yeah.
And so there's a chase.
Yeah.
That's not surprisingly.
Yeah. That reminds me of another thing that I saw, I think on Friday. I can't remember what film it was. I think it was something in the the Hal Roach stuff. But it was one of the Our Gang shorts where it was the Our Gang short was literally all about the dog in Our Gang. And it just struck me as like this whole idea of people just filming animals for entertainment is not a new idea at all. Just put the camera on the dog, see what it does.
One of the earliest Edison films was Boxing Cats.
Yeah.
So right from the beginning.
Yeah.
It's all there.
So if you ever wonder, are cat videos real filmmaking? Yes, they are.
We wouldn't have cinema without it.
Yes. Let's see here. I do remember Gee Whiz pretty well. This is one where this is a weird one because it's about this guy who is working in he's a pharmacist, so that's where you get your pictures developed. Mm-hmm. And somebody develops pictures, and it's pictures of this guy or the guy who brought the pictures and the pharmacist's wife. And the problem with that one was it was all in a different language.
Dutch.
Yes. All of the title cards were in a different language. So I don't know if the wife ever had an explanation for what was happening or what.
Well, since I'm taking intensive German this summer and Dutch is semi-close, the man with the beard who brought in the photographs was her nephew.
Ah.
So then they all end up at a house together, and everyone thinks that they're with each other's husband or wife, but it turns out that he's actually her nephew.
Okay. That was the one piece. If I just had known that, I could have understood the whole rest of it. He should have been wearing a sign that said, I'm her nephew. That's the only thing that I needed. Everything else would have made sense. That's interesting, though. She Loved Him Plenty, I thought, was also pretty good as well. This has Ben Turpin in it, who we saw in several films, including one of the Weiss films. And it's this is the one. This has a sort of a funny bit at the beginning where it's like they own a junk shop of some kind, or it's like a shop where it's all material that has been damaged by fire or water. And then somebody, I can't remember what happens after that. There's a girl involved. It's a whole thing, and I can't remember all of it. I remember liking it, but I don't remember much else about it. But yeah, there you go. And I did not go to anything else on Saturday, so you'll have to throw any highlights at me.
Sure. Well, there was a Harold Lloyd feature, Professor Beware, which was his last sort of full feature.
I really wanted to come by and see that one, but I just didn't make it back.
It was okay. It didn't quite match up with maybe the screwball comedies of the time, or even it had a sort of like horror mummy thing to it that seemed almost like a Val Lewton horror movie. It was a little bit like the Preston Sturges movie. I can't believe I'm missing the title. That Old Brother Where Art Thou is sort of the title comes from, of Sullivan's Travels.
Oh, okay.
So there's sort of a couple traveling across the country, and she's actually, it was okay.
Yeah.
But the sort of discovery, and I think my favorite movie, though I really liked Attaboy a lot, the Walter Ford feature, Would You Believe It?
Okay.
I would really say that movie is like a masterpiece.
Really?
It is up there with the great, last bit of silent film. It's from 1929. It's a play on a sort of spy film. It's got elements of Fritz Lang in it, with sort of, the villain who's sort of controlling everything through modern science. The main character wants to be an inventor. He works at a toy shop. There's this long gag with balloons where he's trying to wrap up balloons. So it's kind of like in Attaboy, the scene in the hotel with the alcohol. This goes on forever, and it's totally brilliant and hilarious.
Yeah.
He invents a machine that can remote control tanks. So the last bit of the film is the tank going out of control. And it's in a small town in England. And the tank basically destroys the village. So It's like this great, so it destroys a family sitting down to dinner. It destroys their house. They have to run away. It destroys a farm. So this idea that sort of modern technology in the military, the sort of new forms of military, is going to sort of destroy the old way of life. So but at the same time, totally hilarious. This tank really is going through and destroying buildings, not special effects.
Yeah.
And it ends with the inventor and the woman he's been courting the entire movie, deciding to get married. So they sit on top of the tank, and it rolls and destroys the church. But it was beautifully shot, hilarious, really, opens up, I think, the idea that, oftentimes British cinema is sort of devalued from this time period, especially into the 30s. And obviously there was some great stuff being made.
Yeah. Well, that, I was told by Richard M. Roberts, the programmer, that this was the top film, the sort of the showcase piece of this Slapsticon, and I did not make it back for that one. I really wish I had, but I would hope that maybe it gets a DVD release and I can get a look at it.
Yeah, I think there's only one print, and it's at the BFI. I think the Library of Congress has the nitrate, but since it's a British film, it's not on their sort of mission statement to preserve. So there's a BFI, but I don't know if they're going to make a DVD of it. But once again, it really is something that could be, it deserves to have a wider exposure.
Yeah. And I didn't see anything else on Saturday. I don't know if there's anything else worth talking about in the late show there.
They were good.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to dismiss them at all.
Yes. And I didn't come back until after lunch on Sunday. I don't know if you saw any of the stuff.
I did. So the late Saturday night and the early Sunday morning were both sort of 30s talkies.
Okay.
So that's not to dismiss them, but the style of comedy is different than the silent films.
Yeah.
And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think if anything really stood out. It's unfortunately a little bit of a blur.
Yeah, I know. That's the thing. So many of these have similar bits and similar ideas, and they're sort of covering things. It's tough for things to stand out. But let's go ahead, and if you think of something, we'll come back.
Okay.
But let's go ahead and move on to The Battling Orioles, which I thought was probably my top 5 of the whole weekend. This is about a guy who his dad was a player on a baseball team called the Battling Orioles. I don't know if it's the same as the current Orioles team or not. I don't know if it even matters. But he has a picture. He's a barber now, and he has a picture on his wall of his dad's team. A guy comes in and says, "Hey, you've got a picture of the Battling Orioles on your wall." And he's like, "Yeah, that's my dad in the center." This guy happens to be a rich guy who lives in New York with a club. who's at this fancy club, and he says, "Hey, you should come and join this club. All these old guys remember the Battling Orioles. They loved them. They'll love to have somebody who was related to a Battling Oriole in the club." The barber also happens to be a magician. He's trying to be a magician. So he thinks this is a great opportunity to go practice his magic in the big city. So he packs up and he goes to the big city. The other sort of interesting thing about this is that this is a film made right after Harold Lloyd left the Hal Roach Studios. So there's a guy that's sort of acting like Harold Lloyd, but he's not Harold Lloyd. So that's sort of interesting as well. But
Glenn Tryon.
Glenn Tryon, yes. The thing that I love most about this film was this was the film with the best brawl of any of the films we saw. It might be the best brawl I've ever seen in a silent film. And the thing I love most about it, it went on for at least 15 minutes. The other thing I loved about it was that at the end of it, literally everyone's clothes were just torn to shreds. Like, all the other films were like, yeah, we'll sort of knock you around, but everyone just basically look okay. At the end of this, it was all these like fancy pants guys in their top hats and their tuxedos going into like a bar where working class people were, and they just had it out, and it was kind of amazing. Everyone was just torn to shreds, and there was a bunch of great little bits. Like there was one where a guy, one of the fancy guys was like, he was standing behind the bar and he'd pick up a bottle and he would throw it at somebody. If he hit someone, he'd put a cigar in his pocket. And he did that a couple times, and then he threw one and accidentally hit one of his friends, and then he was like, he took out the cigar and put one back. It's like he was scoring himself, rewarding himself if he did well, punishing himself if he did bad. I loved that one.
Yeah, that was a brilliant ending. The whole movie could have been that brawl practically.
Yeah.
It makes me think of like the script where they just said, it would just be like one line, then a brawl breaks out.
Yes.
And then it's like 20 minutes of the movie and it's these totally inventive gags and it just keeps on going and it's never not funny. This idea that they were sort of old and decrepit beforehand, not wanting to sort of do anything, and then they get fired up by Glenn Tryon, and now they want to take it out on, I guess, the working class. So this sort of like class war thing comes in, but totally hilarious.
Well, they did have, the working class guys had kidnapped Glenn Tryon's girlfriend, sort of.
Yeah.
But she was sort of with them anyways.
She was with them, but wanted to get out of it.
They were following Glenn Tryon's lead anyway, so I don't... I think it was a little bit of class warfare, but not overt.
Well, not overt, and I guess the idea with a lot of these comedies is at any moment the social order can break down.
Yes.
And the sort of things that are kept under the surface between husband and wife, between the different classes, between races, at any moment it can just erupt, right?
Yeah.
So social control is just barely there.
Yeah. Let's see. I don't remember Queen of Aces at all. I don't remember that one at all. I do remember Misfit Sailor. This one was pretty funny. I think the best gag in this was there's two sailors and they're coming back from the war, and their either commanding officer or senator or somebody of importance wants them to deliver a monkey that he captured to his daughter. So the one sailor thinks he's delivering it to her. Another sailor sort of steals the monkey and delivers it first. The first sailor does not realize this and takes her an empty cage with a brick, except the other sailor, and he has a note with him that he thinks is about the monkey. And it says something like, please keep an eye on him until I get there. Do not let him escape. I don't think he'll get violent, and then the other, the sailor who's sort of trying to sort of get one over on him, who sort of stole the monkey, is playing along and like, oh yeah, you got to throw a bucket of water on him if he gets violent, and it just goes on and on and on. It's pretty funny.
Yeah, that was another sort of fairly common idea, that this misdirection, misrecognition, thinking someone is someone they're not, leading to hilarity.
Yeah. And then we kind of get to the end of it. There's a few things left here. I don't remember much about Who's Afraid, though I can... It's right at the edge of my memory, but I don't remember much about it. Short Kilts I remember pretty well. That had Stan Laurel in it in a solo film. That one's a little weird. Basically, it's like two Scottish families living in Scotland or America. I don't know what. And then they were like they're marrying between the families. Like one son is marrying the daughter of the other family, and back and forth. There's these two little kids who I believe were from our gang, sort of as part of the mix, and it's sort of a madcap thing as well. And then High Society was an our gang, which was bizarre as well. One of the our gang team is has an aunt that wants to take him away and have him live with her now, and she's rich, and he goes there and he's miserable, and he invites our gang over to hang out, and they literally destroy the house. Destroy it in not even creative ways, just very destructive ways to destroy this house. And I think, there was a bit with a parrot that they gave alcohol to that I think I would have found funnier if I wasn't absolutely certain they actually gave the bird alcohol.
That was one of many times that animals were drunk over the weekend. And sometimes it seemed like they would maybe have like a little bit of a string or a fishing wire that was attached to part of the animal, and they would try to work and they would pull it, and so it would make it look like it's stumbling. But animals getting drunk, always funny. Yeah.
And then they played a couple of final films that weren't in the program. The one that I thought was most interesting was I think it was last year or the last time they had an event where they had discovered this new Chaplin short that no one knew Charlie Chaplin was in. And so it starts up, and they decided to replay it this year because this is the first year at the IU Cinema. So this is sort of like one of their crowning achievements is they found this new Charlie Chaplin film. So they replayed it, and it starts out, and you're like, where's Charlie Chaplin? It's like this thing about a guy who's running from thieves and all this stuff. And I'm like, this is like, maybe he meant this is something else. And then they'll show the Charlie Chaplin one later. And then all of a sudden, Charlie Chaplin just walks up and he's in a cop outfit, and he's not the tramp. I think he still has the mustache, but he's totally unmistakable. You cannot look at that person and be like, that's not Charlie Chaplin. It's unmistakable who that is. And he's just hanging out in this little comedy, not doing anything of particular import, just a bit player.
Yep.
It's like it's almost impossible to wrap your brain around the idea that Charlie Chaplin at one point was just a guy who would show up on set and do his thing and then go home. Just insane.
Yeah, it was great to see. I hadn't seen it yet, so it was really nice to see. I'd only heard about it. Yeah.
But yeah, that's the end of Slapsticon 2013. I hope they will come back. I know the attendance from the local community was not great, but I hope that they can justify coming back because I might travel for this if they move somewhere else next year. I really might because it really was that good. But I think next year they'll probably look at doing some different ticketing schemes to kind of make it a little bit easier to get in to various things, but I thought it was a great event.
I agree. I mean, I paid the full amount and went all 4 days, and I mean, obviously, it was a commitment, and this relates to my research, so I can put that kind of time and energy into it. But it was really a fantastic opportunity to see films from private collectors, and also a lot of stuff from the Library of Congress, BFI, other sort of Paramount. I think some films came from them. So great 35 prints, stuff that would normally not be programmed because it's too little known. It's maybe not a crowd pleaser.
Yeah, and literally they schedule wall to wall. There is very little time when you're not able to watch something. If you could, I don't think you could watch everything in here and be like, I didn't like any of that. Yeah. There's something in there that you will enjoy. So I'm really excited about them coming back next year, and I will be there. But yeah. Well, Andy, thank you very much for joining us. I really appreciate it. Hope you guys enjoyed listening to us to talk about Slapsticon. I hope you feel really bad if you missed it because it really was that good. So thank you guys very much for watching, and we will see you next time. My name is Andy, and this has been, and always will be, A Place for Film. A Place for Film is recorded at WFIU Studios in Bloomington, Indiana.